begins like so many stories of wealth and ambition, with a man who seemed to have everything: a dazzling career, unimaginable riches, and a family that appeared to complete the picture of success. But beneath the surface, behind the tall gates of mansions and the polished smiles in charity magazines, darkness was festering. Love was curdling into resentment, wealth into a weapon, and trust into betrayal. And at the center of it all was Ted Ammon, a man who rose from modest beginnings to the glittering heights of New York finance, only to be dragged into one of the most shocking crimes the Hamptons had ever seen. Ted Ammon wasn't born into privilege. His story started far from the glitter of Wall Street. He was bright, ambitious, and determined to build a life that would set him apart. After Harvard Business School, he entered the world of investment banking, climbing higher and higher until he helped orchestrate billion-dollar deals. Colleagues respected him, rivals envied him, and by the 1990s he was a fixture in Manhattan's financial elite. But success has a way of attracting storms, and Ted's would arrive in the form of a woman named Jean Rosa. Jean Rosa Rand was unlike anyone Ted had ever met. She was fiery, artistic, and unapologetically intense. Born in Alabama, raised in California, she had carved her own path into the art world. To Ted, she was intoxicating, a burst of passion in a life filled with numbers and negotiations. Their romance was whirlwind fast, electric, almost cinematic. In 1986, they married, and to the outside world, it looked like a perfect pairing. Together, they adopted twins, a boy and a girl, and built a lifestyle that seemed like something out of a glossy magazine. They bought a sprawling townhouse on the Upper East Side and a breathtaking mansion in East Hampton. The Hampton estate wasn't just any home. It was a 42-room palace, complete with tennis courts, sprawling gardens, and artwork that reflected Jean Rosa's taste. Friends said it was the kind of place that radiated success. To those looking in, it appeared Ted and Jean Rosa were living the dream. But behind those walls, the dream was beginning to rot. Jean Rosa was known for her volatile temper. She could be charming one moment and explosively angry the next. Ted, with his calm and logical nature, often tried to smooth things over, but resentment was growing. As the years passed, their marriage became less about love and more about conflict. The fights were vicious, public, and escalating. Friends recalled tense dinners where insults flew like daggers. Staff whispered about screaming matches that echoed through their grand home. The cracks in their perfect image were widening. Ted, for all his brilliance in finance, struggled with the chaos at home. The couple entered therapy, but it wasn't enough. Jean Rosa's accusations grew darker. She accused Ted of infidelity, of betrayal, of cruelty. Whether those accusations were real or imagined, they fueled her rage. Soon, divorce loomed on the horizon, and with it, a battle that would pit two strong personalities against each other in a fight that was about far more than love. It was about power, pride, and money. By the early 2000s, the divorce was in full swing, and it was brutal. Ted was worth hundreds of millions, and Jean Rosa wanted her share, perhaps more than her share. Custody of their children became a weapon in the war. Friends said the animosity between them was unlike anything they had seen before. Jean Rosa's fury seemed limitless, and Ted, though exhausted, refused to yield. Into this storm walked a man who would change everything: Daniel Pelosi. Danny Pelosi was the opposite of Ted in almost every way. Where Ted was refined, Danny was rough. Where Ted was quiet, Danny was loud. He had worked as an electrician, but his reputation stretched far beyond that. He was brash, cocky, and carried the kind of dangerous energy that both attracted and repelled people. He was also no stranger to the law. He had a criminal record, a reputation for scams, and a knack for manipulating situations to his advantage. Jean Rosa met Danny in 2001, and what followed shocked everyone who knew her. Within months of meeting him, she was infatuated. Friends couldn't understand it. Why would a wealthy socialite, an artist married to a man worth millions, fall for someone like Danny? But Jean Rosa was drawn to his rawness, his energy, his willingness to feed her anger against Ted. To Danny, Jean Rosa wasn't just a lover. She was a ticket into a world of unimaginable wealth. The divorce proceedings turned even uglier. Ted confided to friends that he feared for his safety. He suspected Danny of threatening him, of following him, of trying to intimidate him. He even went so far as to warn people that if anything happened to him, they should look at Jean Rosa and her new boyfriend. It sounded paranoid at the time, but in hindsight, it was chillingly prophetic. On October 22, 2001, Ted Ammon was alone in his East Hampton mansion. The divorce was grinding on, the tension with Jean Rosa at its peak. That weekend, he spent time with friends before retreating to the estate to prepare for the week ahead. What happened next would horrify even the most jaded New Yorkers. When Ted failed to show up for work on Monday morning, concern grew. It wasn't like him to miss appointments, to vanish without explanation. A friend went to check on him at the Hamptons' home. The discovery was gruesome. Ted Ammon, the millionaire banker, was found dead in his bed. He had been beaten and bludgeoned to death, his body showing signs of a violent attack. The image was shocking. A man who had lived among Manhattan's elite, cut down brutally in the safety of his own mansion. The news spread quickly. Wealthy enclaves like the Hamptons thrive on gossip, and soon whispers of murder, betrayal, and scandal were everywhere. Who could have done this? Was it a robbery? A random act of violence? Or was it something closer to home? Detectives immediately noticed there were no signs of forced entry. Nothing valuable seemed to be missing. That narrowed the focus. Whoever killed Ted likely knew him, knew the house, and had a reason beyond theft. And suspicion quickly turned toward Jean Rosa and Danny Pelosi. Generosa's behavior in the aftermath only fueled suspicions. Just weeks after Ted's murder, she married Danny Pelosi. The timing was staggering. Her husband had been murdered in October, and by January she was married to the very man everyone whispered about. To many, it looked like confirmation of the darkest suspicions, but proving it would take time. Investigators dug into Danny Pelosi's past and found plenty to concern them. He had a record of fraud and violence. He was boastful, telling people he was untouchable, and he had a clear motive. If Ted was gone, Jean Rosa stood to inherit a massive fortune, and Danny, by extension, would gain access to it. The puzzle pieces were aligning, but prosecutors needed more. Meanwhile, Generosa's own life was spiraling. She had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and her health was failing. She became more isolated, more paranoid, and more consumed by her rage toward Ted, even in death. Friends said she was erratic, unpredictable, consumed by bitterness. In 2003, she died of cancer, leaving the twins behind and ensuring that the full story of her role in Ted's death might never be told. But Danny Pelosi was still very much alive, and prosecutors were ready to make their move. They built their case meticulously, piecing together phone records, witness statements, and damning details from Danny's own big mouth. He had bragged to people about his connection to Ted's death, even suggesting he knew details only the killer could know. Slowly, the case came together. In 2004, Danny Pelosi was arrested and charged with Ted Ammon's murder. The trial was a spectacle. Prosecutors painted him as a manipulative con man who had wormed his way into Generosa's life, fanned the flames of her hatred, and ultimately killed Ted to secure the fortune he coveted. The defense argued there was no direct evidence tying him to the crime scene, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses described Danny's obsession with Ted's wealth. Others testified about his violent temper, his threats, his arrogance. The prosecution showed jurors how Danny's phone records placed him near the Hamptons estate the night Ted was killed. Piece by piece, they constructed a narrative of greed, rage, and cold-blooded murder. The jury didn't take long. In 2004, Danny Pelosi was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. As the verdict was read, the sense of justice was palpable. Ted Ammon, the brilliant financier who had feared for his life, had finally been vindicated. But for his children, the story was nothing short of tragic. They lost their father to murder, their mother to cancer, and were left to navigate a world where their parents' love story had curdled into something monstrous. The case of Ted Ammon is more than just a crime story. It's a chilling reminder of how love can twist into hatred, how wealth can fuel destruction, and how the people closest to us can sometimes be the most dangerous. In the glittering Hamptons, among mansions and manicured lawns, a man who had everything was destroyed not by strangers, but by the very people who should have loved him most. And in the end, his story leaves us with haunting questions. What good is wealth when it becomes a weapon? What good is love when it turns into obsession? And how many tragedies are born not from strangers in the night, but from the demons we let into our own homes? Ted Ammon's life began with ambition and brilliance, but it ended in betrayal and blood. His story continues to echo through the Hamptons, a cautionary tale wrapped in wealth and shadows, a reminder that even in the most beautiful homes, darkness can be waiting just beyond the lights.